Some of my favorite comments are the ones from ex-Yu-Gi-Oh players that say that my videos helped get them back into the game. I love reading those. It's really cool to know that I can have an impact on the community as a whole. And while I do love those comments, oftentimes I get questions in them that say, well, I want to get back into Yu-Gi-Oh, but I don't know which cards to buy. I've made videos in the past about tech cards to pick up and also budget cards to pick up. And in today's video, I want to talk about 5 generic cards that if you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh in 2019, you probably should have in your collection. While I feel that many of these cards or all of these cards fall under a pretty tight budget, I'm not picking them because of their price. I'm only looking at how good they are and how many decks they can be played in. I'd also like to mention that I have a new affiliate link in the description below for TCG Player, who has kindly sponsored today's video. If you want to buy any of the cards mentioned, or if you want to buy any Yu-Gi-Oh cards or supplies, make sure to click the link below. It really helps out me and the channel, and also helps you guys get these cards at the best prices available online. Anyone that's been following me for a long time shouldn't be surprised about TCG Player being promoted in my videos. I've been working with them for about 10 years, actually longer than I'm posting YouTube videos, so I really do trust them, and I really buy cards, my own cards for my decks from TCG Player. Just the other day, I bought an Ultimate Rare Cosmic Cyclone, which isn't a card I'm mentioning in today's video, but it's a card that I really liked at YCS Knoxville. I wanted a rarity upgrade, and vendors aren't allowed to sell that version of Cosmic Cyclone yet, so I went to TCG Player, ordered one, and it came within a few days. As for honorable mentions, first off, I have Infinite Impermanence, especially the dual power version, which is much cheaper than the original Secret Rare. The only reason this is an honorable mention is because a lot of people have speculated, and there was also a fake leak about this card being in an upcoming starter deck. I think that's very unlikely, but I just want to put it that I'm not saying you should buy Infinite Impermanence right now. However, if you're going to go to a tournament like the WCQ and you don't have your copies yet, I think it's still a safe purchase because that starter deck isn't coming out until August. But I do want to say that there's no confirmation that Infinite Impermanence is in that starter deck, so if you need this card for some upcoming tournaments, now is still a really good time to buy them, considering prior to the reprint, the only version out there was like the $70 to $80 Secret Rare. This card might seem similar to Effect Failure, and in some cases it is, but it really feels different when you go second and are able to use Infinite Impermanence on your first turn to negate a card like Thunder Dragon Colossus, because Effect Failure simply couldn't do that. And then my other honorable mention before we start the list is going to be Fantastical Dragon Phantasm. I know it sounds crazy, it's one of the most expensive cards in the format right now, however, I think now is a really good time to buy it. We now have confirmation that this particular set that this card was in is not going to be in the upcoming Megatons. Instead of including Savage Strike, they decided to include the set that Sky Striker and Gage came out in and all those other cards, which means that this card as well as Pot of Extravagance won't be included in those tins. By that reasoning, we can assume that this card won't be reprinted for a while. I don't think it'll be in the Battles of Legends. I think that's a little bit too soon. I think it might be in next year's Battles of Legends, or if they ever do another Gold Series, but we don't really know. What we do know is that this is one of the best cards of the format for a lot of different decks out there, so even though it has a pretty high price tag, if it's within your own unique budget, definitely consider buying this card because it is a very powerful hand trap. Anyway, now that we can get to the actual list, I know I spent some time on those honorable mentions, but the number 5 spot is Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, specifically the Structure Deck Soul Burner version. This thing has so many reprints at this point. It hasn't quite become Foolish Burial Goods in terms of how many times have been reprinted. However, what makes this card really cool is that at once it used to be a $70 or $80 Secret Rare, and now you have a bunch of different versions to get it. You have Ultra Rares, you have Super Rares, you have Secret Rares still, and also you have the commons from Soul Burner Structure Deck. Picking up a playset of such a powerful hand trap for less or around $20 compared to $80 for one single copy sure is a pretty good feeling, especially for budget players out there. If you're interested in playing Salamangreats, Greats, maybe you just want to buy the entire Structure Deck as a whole because it comes with all those great Salamangreat cards, but if you just need Ash Blossom, by all means, now is the time to pick it up. It's very unlikely that this card will just completely go away from the metagame. Almost every deck plays it right now that is playing hand traps, and I think it's probably the safest hand trap to buy in terms of investment. I know I just mentioned Cosmic Cyclone, and that's not actually going to be on today's list, but if you're looking for other forms of back removal, look no further than Twin Twisters. For the cost of just one discard, you can pop 2 Speller Traps on the field. This is an incredibly powerful effect, and that's probably why it's been so good in so many decks and formats. You can currently pick up a playset of Twin Twisters for the cost that one used to be back in 2016 when it first came out, and it seems like an absolute steal. This card can be played in almost any deck, very similar to Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, and in some cases, Twin actually sees play in decks that aren't playing Ash Blossom. If you look at the Danger Thunder Dragon list, those decks usually aren't playing Ash, but they usually do play Twin. In terms of cards that can deal with back row, in the TCG, you really can't go wrong with Twin Twisters just because it's so versatile. Not to mention, it can also trigger your discard effects like Dangers or your graveyard effects like many of these Salamangreats or Zombies or Burning Abyss. There are a ton of strategies out there that have cards that want to be in the graveyard, and Twin Twisters can put them there while also dealing with your opponent's back row. And then we have my favorite tech of the format by far, Super Polymerization. This card went to limited. It was really cool as a tech option, as a one-of, but now that it's semi-limited, you draw it a lot more reliably, and oh man, is this card insane when it resolves. For this card, you can use it to break your opponent's board, and it's usually played against decks like Orcus, Danger Thunder, or Salamangreat. In the case of any dark strategy, you can summon Starving Venom Fusion Dragon by using 2 of your opponent's dark monsters. That's absolutely insane because this card can't be responded to. It's not technically a spell speed 4 effect because those don't actually exist, but it is an effect your opponent can't do anything against even if they have a crazy negation card or a counter trap. In the case of Salamangreats, you can use Super Polymerization to break your opponent's board and summon Violet Chimera, which is a Salamangreat fusion monster. Oftentimes, Salamangreat decks themselves are going to be playing that alongside their own Fusion of Fire or Super Polymerization. Even if there aren't any Salamangreat cards in your own deck, Super Polymerization can get rid of one of your opponent's Salamangreats and also one of their link monsters to summon the Violet Chimera. This is especially useful because if your opponent has a Salamangreat Roar face down, that can only be activated if they control a link monster. In those cases, because your opponent can't respond to the Super Poly, you are not only getting rid of 2 of their monsters, but also you're locking down one of their back rows to where you can just destroy it with any card, and now it can't be negated because they don't control a link monster anymore. And while it's probably true that you should own at least 1 copy of all 3 of the most popular Nightmare monsters, the most popular one that you definitely have to own is Nightmare Phoenix. The Nightmare monsters are really interesting because a lot of them, especially Nightmare Phoenix and Cerberus, don't really have good link arrows, despite the fact their effects are so powerful. In the case of Nightmare Phoenix, yes, when you summon it, you can't summon anything below it from the extra deck because it doesn't have any downward pointing arrows. However, its effect is so darn good because it just pops a back row by discarding a card. Yes, you can use cards like Twin Twisters or MST or Cosmic Cyclone, but what makes Nightmare Phoenix so good is you don't have to draw it, it's always just in the extra deck, and it's so easy to summon these cards. You just need monsters with different names, which if you play a deck with more than 2 monsters, you probably can summon Nightmare Phoenix. And remember, even if you're worried about not having a downward pointing arrow, keep in mind that you can use the Phoenix for a bigger link summon. Maybe a link 3 like Nightmare Unicorn, maybe a link 4 monster that you're playing for whatever deck you're using. I know it can seem scary that you can't summon anything to where it points to because it only points towards your opponent, or sometimes I guess it can point to your main monster zone, but in general, the way that people are using Phoenix is just as a quick form of back row removal while triggering their effects like Twin Twisters, and then they use the Phoenix for a bigger link summon. In the past, when I've done these videos and talked about link monsters that you should pick up, I've often mentioned Borreload Dragon, which is still a very good card to pick up if you don't have any copies. However, I think I'm moving on from Borreload Dragon because I think a lot of people already own that card, especially players that already have bought Dual Power because it was printed in that set. So now I'm moving on to a different Link 4 monster that I just mentioned a couple weeks ago, and that is Mekk-Knight Crusadia Avermax. This card is absolutely bonkers in decks like Salamangreats and any rogue strategy. If your deck could make Borreload Dragon, you can probably make this card as well. What makes this card so good is that it can't be targeted, and it has a bunch of attack points if it battles a monster that was special summoned, and also if your opponent manages to defeat it some way, even without targeting it and even without destroying it in battle, you can then shuffle a card on the field into the deck. This thing is really hard to remove from the field. Because it can't be targeted and because it gains a ton of attack points, the only real way to deal with it is non-targeting card effects, but even if your opponent does that, you still get some value by its graveyard effect, which is absolutely insane. Compared to the other cards on this list, Avermax is not nearly as much of a staple. However, I think it's only going to get better with time, and because it just came out, it's a really good time to pick it up. Anyway though, that's going to wrap up my 5 generic Yu-Gi-Oh cards that you need in 2019. I think these videos are really important for returning players or players just getting into competitive play. Like I said at the beginning of this video, thank you so much to TCGplayer for sponsoring today's installment, and also if you want to buy any of the cards that I mentioned or any other cards, make sure to use my link in the description below so that you guys can support the channel while also picking up some of these awesome cards. I'll see you later though. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.